Hi, this is Mark Kausler doing the uh, voiceover commentary for Winky the Watchman, which was made in 1944 and 1945. Originally ran 850 feet, produced in Technicolor, made by Hugh Harmon Productions. And on June 17, 1944, Hugh Harmon made an agreement between the state of Tennessee Dental Department and the U.S. Public Health Service to produce an educational film about dental health. It was one of the only films he made in which he held the copyright. George Gordon and Ray Abrams animated on Winky, and other animators were probably Carl Urbano, Charlie McGurl, and Arnold Gillespie. They were directors too. The story was by Bernie Wolfe, Joe Smith, and Frank Tipper. And other animators were Cecil Surrey, Ralph Tiller, Armand Schaefer, and Tom McDonald. The layout and background were by Bruce Bushman, Irv Weiner, Boris Gorlick, and Jerry Nevius. And the checking and technical were Sherman Glass, Richard and Herman Ising, who were both brothers of Rudy Ising. And over the years, Hugh used this film, Winky the Watchman, as an income producer for himself throughout the next 16 years. He held the rights to it, and he sold them over and over again for both the 35mm theatrical version and 16mm and TV rights. And on February 1st, 1946, Hugh sold the 16mm rights in Winky to Pictorial Films Incorporated. Now, Pictorial Films is well known to collectors because it had entered an agreement with Hugh and Rudy some years earlier to distribute some of their Happy Harmonies, such as Barnyard Babies, Little Bantamweight, and Old Pioneer, to camera stores and non-theatrical rental houses in 16mm. However, they did that without consulting MGM, which held all the rights in them. MGM contested those agreements, and the litigation dragged on for years. And as a result, Hugh and Rudy didn't make a penny off of those sales. And however, for some reason, Pictorial held no grudge against Hugh for all that litigation and wanted to use Winky. So they got the rights to it in 16mm for a while. Now, in 1947, in August, Hugh loaned Harry Popkin, who was the producer of Gangsters on the Loose, Champagne for Caesar, and a film called 10 Little Indians in 1965. Hugh loaned Harry Popkin. Actually, no, I'm sorry, I've got it wrong. Harry Popkin loaned $3,500 to Hugh in exchange for the 35mm rights in Winky. And then in 1949, the Iowa Department of Health in Des Moines tried to clear the television rights to Winky. This was attempted several times over the years. For some reason, Charlie McGurl and Hugh and Arnold Gillespie, who were the partners in this film, didn't want to license it for TV. Maybe TV was too new in 1949. They didn't trust it. But Charlie McGurl wrote a letter in which he said that they hoped they didn't have to give Iowa Health the TV rights. And then also in December 1949, W. Earl Schaefer, who was Hugh's lawyer, tried to get Pictorial Films to release the rights in Winky back to Hugh. And Hugh expected to make $50,000 over 5 years with Pictorial Films, but unfortunately Winky didn't make anywhere near that. And in April 1950, Hugh sold the TV rights to a strange company called Animaction Pictures. And he allowed Winky to either be cut up into 1-minute segments or use the whole cartoon for telecast. And also in April 1950, Pictorial Films finally gave up the rights to Winky after contesting it a bit back to Hugh. And under the new terms, Pictorial could keep the prints they had already made of Winky and sell them without accounting to Hugh. Then they let Hugh have the option to buy back the prints at cost whenever he wanted to. And that was still going on as late as September of that year. Pictorial was still selling back-ordered prints. And then in 1951, the Albany, New York Department of Health wanted to clear the TV rights to Winky, and they weren't successful. And then in 1954, Hugh assigned the 35mm rights in Winky to an outfit called Cornell Films. And Cornell Films also optioned Hugh's screenplay to his feature-length cartoon King Arthur, which Hugh tried to produce for many, many years and was not successful. And then in 1956, Hugh sold all the distribution rights in Winky in all gauges to a guy named Philip Nasser, who produced a picture called Silent Fear in 1956 as an independent. And Nasser BN Productions signed the agreement on March 4th, 1957 with Hugh. And in the meantime, 3 other companies, Cornell Films, Edited Picture Systems of New York, and National Motion Picture Company in New York were selling prints of Winky in 16mm, so supposedly unauthorized by Hugh. And this kind of gave his lawyer the fits, because here he was trying to clear the rights to Winky, and evidently Hugh had already let 3 other companies have the 16mm rights without letting him know. And Then, in 1957, Philip Nasser, the producer, finally acquired legitimate TV rights to Winky. And in the meantime, on June 7th, 1957, the American Dental Health Plan, which was a Los Angeles company, was using prints which they illegally bought of Winky from Cornell Films, and they had to give him a cease and desist letter. And then in 1960, finally Philip Nasser bowed out. I guess he couldn't make any money from Winky either. And then in 1961, this is kind of the capper of the story, Hugh tried to sell Winky outright to a producer named Irv Briskin. And Irv Briskin was a lot producer at Columbia who produced a lot of B westerns with Buck Jones, Tim McCoy. He produced a picture called The Blonde from Brooklyn, and he produced the Boston Blackie series and a lot of comedy films with Joan Davis, all very B stuff. And he tried to sell Irv Briskin the rights to Winky for $25,000, but finally he was willing to settle for $17,500. And Hugh attached a note to a letter to his lawyer, and he says, "Earl, let's hope this works, Hugh." So if by that time he was getting pretty desperate to get some money going in for 1961. And actually, over the years, I got to know Hugh pretty well because I met him through Bob Clampett, and we participated in some of the interviews for Mike Barrier's book. And it was really a thrill to know him because he had so many great stories, and he was really a colorful character, always dressed very nattily with a little hat with a feather in it, And he would never meet us at his apartment because evidently he lived in kind of near poverty situation over on Selma in Hollywood. He always met us at the Old World restaurant in Beverly Hills. He'd always insist on meeting me at a restaurant somewhere to talk about cartoons or whatever. And he was always in need of money, so I would loan him money from time to time. And he was quite a colorful character. It was really a thrill to get to know him. I'll never forget one time he met a lady from, I think she was a Hungarian or something like that, and he became very enamored of her. And he told me, "Mark, never be afraid of marrying anybody." So he just up and married her. And then she stayed married to him, I think, for about a month. And then she took off with whatever tiny little bit of money he had left. So never be afraid of marrying anybody. But unfortunately, in that case, it didn't work out too good for poor Hugh. But the staging in Winky the Watchman, if you've been noticing it as I've been rattling on here, is very influenced by the wartime films that Hugh was making at the time. A lot of battles staged and a lot of interesting angles on weaponry and just really ambitious looking layout. And they probably spent quite a lot of money on this picture. Well, it was made for about $45,000, which was a pretty good budget in 1945. Hugh also produced a lot of other films at the same time for government use. Like he made a film called Gonorrhea from 1943, which I've never seen. I don't know if it was animated or live. He did a film called Message to Women, which was about women's health. He did a film called Parade of Progress, a whole series of films during the war called Shipbuilding Skills. That was a whole series of 20-minute films. And he did Easy Does It, which is on another one of these cult tune discs, which is a very good production. But that was kind of a dated picture because of the grocery stores and everything. Stokely Van Camp produced it. And I guess Hugh couldn't use that as easily as he could Winky, because Winky kind of is a timeless film about a timeless subject. And that's Ralph Byrd, who played Dick Tracy later on in a lot of 1940s Dick Tracy live-action films. And
if you're careless as Winky was, remember, the Battens are always waiting to attack your wall.
Okay, I was going to make this comment about the cast for Winky the Watchman. Ralph Byrd plays the part of the dentist, and later on or actually right around the same time, he was in several live-action serials and feature films playing the part of Dick Tracy. And the little girl with red hair that's on the left-hand side of the screen is Janet Burston, who was in the early 1940s one-reel MGMR gangs with Mickey Gubitosi, otherwise known as Bobby Blake of Beretta fame and other infamy too. But anyway, so that's basically the cast that he was using. I don't know if he did the cinematography himself or he hired someone to do it. He did a lot of live action and animation programs right around that time, a lot of films that used a lot of live. So I don't know who he hired for a cinematographer. So anyway, there's some interesting people, famous people involved with this film.